Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the data and the ethics behind PGT-A. Now, if you've been following IVF trends, you know this controversial embryo screening technique is gaining massive traction, especially in places like Singapore. But as we navigate this super complex world of modern fertility treatments, it is absolutely critical that we separate the marketing hype from the actual medical reality.
Before we just go ahead and accept this procedure as the mainstream standard of care, we've got to ask a really tough question. Is this highly marketed insurance policy for IVF actually destroying perfectly healthy embryos? Let's look closely at the data today to see if the big promises actually match the real-world outcome. Part 1, the promise of PGT-A. So let's get into it. As more women naturally delay childbearing, we know there's an increased risk of genetic abnormalities, like Down syndrome. And in response to that very real anxiety, clinics have been heavily marketing PGT-A, which stands for Pre-Implantation Genetic Testing for Aneuploidy, as this sort of essential insurance policy. It's pitched as a necessary safeguard for older moms turning to IVF. And, initially, some recent local data in Singapore seemed to completely back up this really optimistic narrative. In fact, in a recent Ministry of Health pilot trial at public IVF centers, the results looked super encouraging. Out of 303 women in the trial, the procedure led to 119 pregnancies and a very promising 92 live births. I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a fantastic boost to live birth rates, right? But hang on. Notice the stark contrast between how it was tested and how it's used today. That local success was achieved in a highly selected group. We're talking strict eligibility criteria, women 35 and older with severe reproductive histories like 2 or more IVF failures or multiple pregnancy losses. But the modern reality, PGT-A is being broadly marketed and routinely hard sold to the general population of all older women, completely regardless of whether they have those severe medical indications. Which brings us to part 2, the global reality check. So what happens when we look at massive global data sets? Well, the narrative completely flips. When applied broadly, huge international trials consistently show that PGT-A does not improve your cumulative chances of having a baby. The STAR trial across 34 clinics in the US, the UK, and Australia, no significant overall improvement. A massive study out of China published in the New England Journal of Medicine, no better cumulative live birth outcomes than just standard IVF. And incredibly, looking at the SART database of over 130,000 cycles, routine application of PGT-A was actually associated with a lower cumulative live birth rate. Wow! Because of this undeniable mountain of evidence, major medical bodies are actually stepping in to urge restraint. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine has explicitly stated that the routine, broad application of PGT-A on all older women should simply not be recommended. They are quite literally telling us to hold the phone here. And the warnings get even stronger. The UK's Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority uses a traffic light system for IVF add-ons, and they have literally given PGT-A a red rating. Now, a red rating is a massive red flag. It means there is zero evidence it improves the chances of having a baby for most patients, and it actually warns of a very real risk that PGT-A may reduce the number of available embryos you have for transfer. Part 3, the flaw in the test. So why on earth is a test designed to help actually reducing your chances? To get that, we have to talk about mosaicism. This is a completely natural condition where an embryo contains a mixture of both normal and abnormal cells. It's almost like a giant puzzle. It is not uniformly just one or the other. This totally illustrates the fatal flaw in how the test operates. The procedure starts with a highly invasive biopsy, grabbing cells from the outer layer of the embryo, which actually becomes the placenta. If that sample shows abnormal cells, boom, the embryo is flagged. But here is the kicker. Emerging research shows that the inner cell mass, the part that literally becomes the baby, often self-corrects. It basically pushes those abnormal cells to the outside layer. So because the test only looks at that outer layer, clinics are tragically discarding perfectly healthy, potentially viable embryos. Part 4, fear marketing and exploitation. Listen, this isn't just some academic debate. This scientific flaw has profound, devastating real-world consequences. Look at Australia. The fertility giant Monash IVF recently agreed to a $56 million settlement. This was a massive class action lawsuit involving 700 former patients who were allegedly robbed of parenthood because their potentially viable embryos were destroyed by flawed genetic testing. And guys, similar consumer fraud lawsuits are happening in the US right now. And this brings us to the real danger of normalizing this procedure in places like Singapore. In a hyper-competitive society, the pressure to succeed is intense, and the stigma around disabilities is unfortunately immense. Desperate patients are so vulnerable here, and unethical clinics can totally weaponize that fear. We've even seen cases globally where clinics use unauthorized photos of children with Down syndrome in their ads just to hard sell PGT-A as a safeguard against tragedy. It's incredibly manipulative.
Clinics also completely exploit how confusing statistics can be. Notice how the numbers get manipulated. In their fear-based marketing, a clinic might scream about a terrifying tenfold increase in Down syndrome risk just to induce panic. But what's the reality? That tenfold jump is actually just going from a 0.1% risk at age 25 to a 1% risk at age 40. To put that into perspective, it's a tiny 0.9% absolute increase, but they spin it as this absolutely essential insurance policy you just have to buy.
Part 5. Safeguarding vulnerable patients. Okay, so what should you take away from all this? If this test is going to exist, we desperately need a path forward that actually protects hopeful parents. Before making this the mainstream standard, stringent safeguards have got to be put in place. We're talking strict regulations against fear-based marketing and a total ban on misleading relative risk statistics. We absolutely need mandatory counseling by certified genetic counselors. Patients deserve full transparency about the risks of the biopsy and the reality that mosaic embryos can actually self-correct. Plus, patients really need to be directed towards less invasive alternatives. Once pregnant, things like non-invasive prenatal testing or NIPT and advanced ultrasound scans offer amazing screening without risking an embryo at all. And looking forward, science is working on developing completely non-invasive AI-based assessments using time-lapse images to check chromosomal normality safely. That is a real game changer. So, as we navigate these complex demographic challenges and the incredibly powerful drive to build a family, we're left with a huge question. How do we balance this deep desire for parenthood with ethical medical practices that protect rather than exploit our most vulnerable patients? The pursuit of a family shouldn't cost you unnecessary anxiety or the tragic loss of a viable embryo. Are we really willing to let fear-based marketing outpace evidence-based medicine?